Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Days of Thunder. My name is Mike Wax, joined here, as always, with my co-host, Jake Ricker. Jake, what would you say is the Lightning's low point in their franchise history?
Oh, it's tough. We had a couple really bad years in the first couple of seasons, but these next three seasons that we're about to talk about may be three of the worst.
Yeah, and, we got done with episode 2 talking about the year that Vincent Lecavalier was drafted, the hero of the Lightning, the Michael Jordan of hockey, as Phil Esposito called him many, many times. That season, they finished 17-55 and 10, which would be the worst record in franchise history. But unfortunately for the team, it would not get better throughout the next three seasons, which we are focusing on today, talking about the 1998-99 season, as well as the 1999, 2000, and 2001 seasons. So let's get right into it. In the 1998-1999 season, the Lightning had two more wins than the previous year, going 1954 and 9 with 47 points. Jake, their second 40-ish point season in a row. Definitely the low point of the franchise.
Absolutely, especially after you draft a guy like Vinny, even though you don't expect him to come into the league right away. That's supposed to be your game changer, and then you have a season like that. It's definitely disappointing. It's kind of like with you look at Edmonton, who drafts Connor McDavid. When you get a guy like that, you're expecting to play really well, but it didn't work out for the Lightning in that way. And normally it doesn't. You end up getting a couple of draft picks in the next couple of years as well, though. So that is a positive there. But definitely a frustrating year for Lightning fans after having one of the worst seasons just before, and then just having another struggle.
And we talked about goaltending struggles in the previous episodes. This year was no different, with the Lightning using 6 different goaltenders, as Corey Schwab was the starter. Darren Pupa, also known as one of the first Lightning sort of big name players, was another one of those goaltenders that got a little bit of spotlight. But nobody could score on the team, it seemed. Like, the leading scorers were Darcy Tucker with 43 points and Wendell Clark with 42. So a couple of lifelong Maple Leafs helped the Lightning actually, get through the season because it was such a poor season. And it ended up with the Lightning actually getting their second first overall pick in a row. But, Jake, they didn't hold on to that pick.
No, they did not. And real quick, before we get to that trade, too, I want to mention to you, you're talking about nobody being able to score on that team. The highest goal scorer on that team was Wendell Clark with just 28 goals. I mean, normally we talk about players in the Lightning now with 20-goal season as a decent little season, but yet that was the top scorer on the Lightning. But going back to the draft pick, yes, they did not hold on to that draft pick. They traded it to the Vancouver Canucks. And, Michael, you've got some interesting facts on this. This was a really interesting scenario with the way this worked out, and I'll let you talk about it, but it makes you wonder if they would have held on to this draft pick, how different the NHL could have been.
Yeah, so during the 1998-99 draft, there were 3 big-time names. There was Patrick Stefan, and there were the Sedin twins. And there was this lingering thought that the Sedin twins wouldn't come over to America if they weren't drafted together. So the Vancouver Canucks decided, you know what, we're going to take a swing at it. We're going to trade up to the number 1 overall pick and then finagle our way into getting both of them somehow. So the Lightning had to be part of that piece in history, trading away that number 1 overall pick for the number 4 slot, which was coveted by Vancouver. Vancouver ended up trading back to number 2 and 3 with the Thrashers to select the Sedin twins. The Lightning would actually go down to pick number 8 in that draft. Unfortunately, their pick didn't do anything. It didn't really materialize. And overall in that draft, except for the Sedin twins, there weren't really any standout performers in that draft. And I think that hurt the Lightning, because if there was somebody that was really a standout performer that nobody else could even fathom the Lightning trading that first overall pick with, they probably would have taken him. That would have changed the franchise trajectory for a long time with, player X and Vincent Lecavalier at the forefront.
Absolutely. And, you have to wonder too, was it that, that looming idea of they wouldn't come over if they both weren't drafted by the same team that ended up forcing the Lightning to make the move that they ended up doing? Or maybe, who knows, maybe the Lightning would have traded for Vancouver's pick and acquired both. How different or how crazy would that be if the Lightning ended up acquiring both of the Sedin twins and having them play for us for many, many years? But yeah, it's a really interesting scenario, the way that played out. And obviously for the Lightning, it did not work out. But luckily for the Lightning, they had already Vincent Lecavalier, who just was a huge saving grace to this franchise. And even though in this next season that we're about to get into, it didn't go well overall, Vinny was a huge star of that season.
Yeah, so going into the 1999-2000 season, the Lightning once again finished with 19 wins. This time they finished with only 47 losses. They had 9 ties, I believe, and 7 overtime losses. It was that weird time period where, overtime losses were a thing, but also ties were a thing at the same time. That would change in just a couple of years. What a weird little time for the NHL. But you're right, Vincent Lecavalier, in his second real season, blossomed as a 19-year-old. 25 goals, 42 assists, 67 points. Still, by the way, a minus 25 on the season. But as a 19-year-old in 80 games, 67 points, a fantastic representation of what he would become.
No doubt about it. He was such a good player, and to get off that great start, especially on a bad team. I think that's the key here. Like, obviously, you mentioned the minus 25. That was because the Lightning weren't a good team overall. Like, when Stamkos joined the team, when he was drafted by the Lightning, they had a relatively decent team around Stamkos, and he was that extra piece to really start pushing them over the top in those next couple of years. But for Vinny, he came on a team that just wasn't great at all. So that makes a difference. And the fact that he's still able to put up 67 points is really good. And I'd love to know also from, our viewers, let me know in the comments down below, what was your favorite Vinny moment from his career? Obviously, we'll get into more of Vinny through the years because he still had a lot to do and a lot to prove over the next couple of years, but such a special player for the franchise. I'm so glad we acquired him. And real quick too, Michael, before we move on as well, you mentioned the trading down of last year and the draft pick not really ended up turning into anything. The one positive here is the Lightning ended up having just as bad of a season again, so they got another top draft pick.
Yeah, they did get another high draft pick. Unfortunately, it didn't really materialize into anything substantial. Alexander Svetsov, I hope I pronounced that correctly, with third overall pick, a center who looked like he was going to be a superstar out of KHL. Only 37 points in 179 games. They only had 2 players from that entire draft in which they had, a ton of picks get into the NHL, and neither of them really made a difference. I think that was the weak spot of the Lightning. You look at their team, there was a ton of ownership changes, a ton of general manager changes. I think that one of the things that brought up in the general manager's sphere of things is GMs love to have their own scouting staff. If you keep on replacing your scouting staff, things aren't going to be set in stone, which means that you're going to make some terrible picks. And the Lightning did that for a really, really long time. We talk about all the time how Al Murray is basically the king. Julian Brisebois, Steve Yzerman, they could have said whatever they wanted, but Al Murray was the guy when it came to drafting players. The Lightning didn't have that signature scout to tell people, okay, this is how we're going to do things back then. And it really hurt them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just comparing now and to the back then, you look at how many gems the Lightning have picked up over the years recently, and guys like Braden Point, even Nikita Kucherov, who was a second round pick, who probably if you redrafted, would be the number one overall pick. Guys like Andre Palat, even some, it doesn't pertain to drafting, but even just signing unrestricted free agents and guys like Johnson were just such good pickups for the Lightning, have continued to help them perform at a high level. And you look at now when they had multiple high round draft picks, in some cases the number one overall pick, it never worked out, and they continued to struggle for those couple of years until they were finally able to make a change. So it really shows you how important scouting is and how much of a difference it can make. And even though, normally scouts don't get that much appreciation.
Scouts don't get that much appreciation, and scouts actually help the Lightning a ton when it comes to making trades. Jake, we were looking at potential trades that have happened over the past 3 years of Lightning history for this video, and two of them really sprung to mind. The first one happened on October 1st, 1999, with Freddie Modine being acquired from the Tampa Bay Lightning, or by the Tampa Bay Lightning, excuse me, from the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for Corey Cross and a 7th-round draft pick. That one, we'll get to the other one in a bit, but that one was pretty important when it came to the Lightning getting their foot in the door of getting that cup core together.
Exactly, and that's the key point right there, getting that cup core together. This was a great trade. Obviously, looking back at it now, Modine was such a good player for us and played so well for so many years. In fact, in that 1999 season, he had 22 goals, 26 assists, and 48 points, which was best for second on the team. And what we gave up, it was relatively nothing. We didn't really give up much at all. So that trade worked out very, very well for the Lightning. But we'll get to this in a little bit. There was even a better trade that the Lightning made.
There was a better trade, but before we get to that, once again, I'm sorry to all our viewers that really want to hear what the trade is. We have to go to the 2000-2001 season. And once again, the Lightning struggled. They did better. They did much, much better. They picked up 24 wins this time, only had 47 losses, had 6 ties, excuse me, and 5 overtime losses. They finished 5th in the Southeast Division. Once again, they had a coaching change with John Tortorella taking over midway through the season. And they also had a captaincy change. Chris Gratton was no longer the captain. Bill Holder was no longer the captain. It was now Vincent Lecavalier's team as a 19/20-year-old who was given the captaincy in the 1999-2000 season. He was given it as a full-timer in this season. A statement was made with this captaincy, and unfortunately for the Lightning, it would sort of blow up in their face because Vincent Cavalier, spoilers, was eventually stripped of the captaincy because he wasn't ready for it. But it was a statement made that we have a lot of trust in this 19-year-old kid.
Oh, absolutely. He was drafted as the one that was supposed to be the face of the franchise, that was going to change everything for the Lightning, which, he largely did. And even though he was only the captain for this short year this time around, he ended up, which we'll get into in a later episode, becoming a captain for a long time for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So despite it, quote unquote, blowing up in their face, it still was a move that ended up working out, because for the time being, the Lightning had been bouncing around from captain to captain, and having a long-term captain can be something that helps out a lot for a team. I talk about locker room chemistry all the time and how much of a difference that can make for a player when they get traded or something like that, or that's a big deal. And having a captain that's there and to stick around and is a part of that franchise, being drafted into the franchise, that can be a huge help for a team.
That can be. And we mentioned Vinny as captain, Vinny as a player. Vinny was not the only one when it came to the Lightning franchise history that really showed this season, hey, maybe the Lightning got something going. The leading scorer this season was Brad Richards with 62 points in 82 games. He had 21 goals. The leading goal scorer, Frederick Modine, as we mentioned, what a great trade that was with 32 goals. He was the only Lightning member to top 30 goals. Vincent Lecavalier was third in scoring with 51 points, 23 goals. And an oft-regarded Calgary waiver wire player was picked up that season. I believe his name is Martin St. Louis. And as a 25-year-old, he was great for the Lightning. He had 40 points in just 78 games. I know points aren't everything, plus minuses and everything. He was a minus player. But, an oft-regarded player, they brought him in, and he was awesome.
He truly was. And Marty's story is obviously great, knowing how everything ended up with him and that Calgary kind of gave up on him. They thought he was too small, but Marty's speed, really was a huge part of his game. And it showed off many times for the Lightning and why, he became such a good player. So, this was one move the Lightning made that really, we talked about the scouting moves they make now, how they didn't have it in these couple of years, but this is one move that they made, and they made a couple right before we got into this better era, I guess you could call it. And this was one of them. It's a great move by the Lightning. And, Michael, you look at the 1999 team versus the 2000 team, and, just from a name perspective, there were some big names, and you really started to see that eventual Stanley Cup champion core really develop in this 2000 season, even despite the bad season.
Yeah, and there were a couple of players that I didn't even mention that were a part of that young core. Ryan Johnson was a good young center at that time. Pavel Kubina became one of the best Lightning defensemen in history, I think. I don't think that's controversial to say. Jason
Absolutely not.
Cullimore was a big player when it came to Lightning in the playoffs. Corey Sarich was an underrated defenseman for them. There was the makings of a team on the rise here. And, I think a lot of people saw that, and you needed that one piece, that one really big thing to take you over the top. What is that most of the time, Jake? It's a goaltender. Kevin Weeks wasn't really panning out for the Lightning, so they went out and they made the second big trade in that 3-year span. They traded Mike Johnson, Paul Mara, Ruslan Zenolin, and a 2001 second-round pick that ended up becoming Matthew Spiller for Stan Nikar and the rights to Nikolai Khabibulin, also known as the Bulin Wall. Jake, you were talking earlier about how this is one of the best trades in Lightning history. I can't say I disagree with you. This is one of the best trades in Lightning history.
Oh, absolutely. This is for sure a top 5 Lightning trade of all time, maybe even a top 3 if you want to go that far. But no doubt about it, it was such a good trade. Nikolai Khabibulin was one of my favorite players growing up as a kid. I had posters of him in my room, action figures. Him and Dave Andreychuk were my 2 favorites. But and looking at this trade, if you look into who he gave up a little bit, like Mike Johnson, for example, the one piece for the Lightning, he played in just 2 seasons, and in those 2 seasons, he had a total of 22 points in 38 points, which isn't bad. It's a respectable number, but nothing crazy either. Again, you look at guys today, especially on the Lightning now, that's third line, maybe second line for teams. So, not a huge piece there. And then you look at the second piece they give up, Paul Mara, I butchered that. I apologize. But again, for the Lightning, he only had 18 points and 16 points in the 2 years he played. He did play 3 years, but only played 1 game in that 1 year. And then one of the other pieces they gave up didn't ever even make it into the NHL. So to give up those 3 little pieces, they'll give a second-round pick as well. And to get back Nikolai Khabibulin, the eventual Stanley Cup champion winner, that was such a good trade. He was one of the best. I think Vasi just unseated him, but for a long time, he was the greatest Lightning goaltender in franchise history. And Stan Netzcash, too, who actually was neighbors with for a little while, believe it or not. He was also a decent piece. He didn't do too much, but again, another guy, a part of that 04 Stanley Cup championship team.
Yeah, as you mentioned, a great trade not only for Javi Bulin, but we did have a player come in and get a couple of games in the Stanley Cup playoffs, especially when you're playing the Flyers. There's a ton of opportunities for guys to step in the lineup and be fresh and be physical. So overall, a great trade for the Lightning, especially considering what they gave up. You could debate what the top 5 trades are of all time. I would say that would be one of the trades in it for the Lightning, at least. There weren't any, big opportunities or big changes here, other than there was one big change in the general manager position of things. Rick Dudley was brought in, and after one season, they determined that Rick Dudley's time is no more. So what did they do? They went out and brought in Jay Feaster. Feaster was the mastermind behind the Javi Bulin trade. He will be the mastermind behind a couple of other trades that we hear about. Was the Lightning general manager for 8 seasons, which was the high in terms of the most amount of cumulative seasons that a general manager was part of the Lightning organization since until Steve Yzerman, who actually tied that record with 8 seasons. So, the first great general manager. There are a lot of firsts when it comes to the Lightning in these early years, but he was really the first great general manager.
Yeah, and this year, in so many different ways, this was the beginning of a big era in the Lightning franchise history, because you look at you mentioned too the GMs were constantly changing, the coaches were constantly changing just over these 3 years here, and then right at the end of the 2001 or 2000 to 2001 season, you get Jay Feaster and John Tortorella as well. So two huge pieces in Feaster. He did so much for this franchise. I believe he was even a big piece in that in acquiring Marty as well off the waivers. So many little moves or big moves that he made over the course of these next couple of years that really turned this Lightning franchise around and really started to prove that hockey in the South could succeed.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this for years, but it really started with hockey in the South with the Florida Panthers making the Stanley Cup Finals back in 1996. But it wasn't until the Lightning had this sustained period of success in the early till mid 2000s that things began to turn around when it came to hockey in the southern United States. But again, we're going to get there soon. We haven't gotten there yet. Uh, as a cliffhanger, I will say that the next episode is a can't miss episode because we talk about now one of 2 of the greatest moments in Tampa Bay Lightning history. Jake, do you have anything else in this section of time for the Lightning?
Yes, actually, there is one other thing I do want to mention is that in 1999, the Lightning hosted the NHL All-Star Game at what was formerly known as the Ice Palace, now known as Amalie Arena. But the Lightning have obviously hosted 2 All-Star games in franchise history. But hosting an All-Star game is a big deal. We just talked about how Tampa really during this time started to really build that idea of hockey can succeed in the South, and getting the All-Star game is a huge deal. And to have, all those festivities going on down here in Tampa Bay is awesome. It was so good for that franchise. And who knows, maybe even that's what ultimately kicked off these great couple of years, because right after they had that All-Star game, even though they had a bad season that year, a lot of good changes started coming their way.
Exactly. A lot of good things to happen. Again, a cliffhanger for the next episode. But Jake, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Once again, guys, thank you so much for watching Days of Thunder episode 3. Don't be afraid to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and follow us on Twitter at Bay_Bolts for news and notes. JBB, please make a trade soon, so we have some more news and notes to talk about, and the game recaps will come about very soon. Once again, for Michael Wax and Jake Ricker, thank you so much for watching. And once again, your Tampa Bay Lightning are 2020 Stanley Cup champions. Take care, guys.
Go Bolts.